There was once a saying among the elders: a man may cross oceans to escape his enemies, but he cannot outrun his own mind. Few people understood these words. Most believed that suffering came from difficult people, unfortunate events, or an unkind world. Whenever life became painful, they searched for another city, another career, another relationship, another dream. They believed that somewhere beyond the next mountain, peace was waiting. Yet wherever they went, their restless mind quietly followed. Long before kingdoms rose and fell, nestled among mist-covered mountains stood an ancient monastery. It had no golden gates, no marble halls, no treasures hidden beneath its floors. Its walls were worn by rain, its wooden beams carried the scent of countless seasons. To strangers, it appeared almost forgotten by the world, yet those who truly searched for wisdom somehow always found the narrow path that led there. Merchants burdened by wealth, soldiers haunted by war, parents exhausted by worry, scholars who possessed countless books but very little peace, even kings, disguised in ordinary clothes, occasionally climbed the mountain in silence. Each arrived carrying a different story, yet all carried the same invisible weight, the burden of an unsettled mind. The old monk who lived there welcomed everyone in exactly the same way. He never asked, "Who are you?" He never asked, "How much do you own?" Nor did he ask, "What have you accomplished?" Instead, he would simply smile and ask one quiet question: "Has your mind become your friend, or your master?" Most visitors did not know how to answer, for they had spent their entire lives mastering the world, but had never once learned to understand the one thing that guided every decision they made: their own mind. One autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted slowly through the mountain air, a traveler appeared at the monastery gate. He was still young, perhaps no older than 30. His clothes were woven from the finest silk, a jade pendant rested upon his chest. Behind him stood servants guarding horses loaded with expensive goods collected from distant kingdoms. Anyone meeting him for the first time would have called him successful. Fortune had smiled upon him from an early age. His family owned flourishing businesses. His name was respected wherever merchants gathered. People admired his intelligence. Children dreamed of becoming like him. Even rivals secretly envied his achievements. But appearances often tell only the smallest part of a story. For several years, sleep had become a stranger. Every night, as darkness settled across the land, another world awakened inside his mind. A single mistake from the past would replay endlessly. A future disaster that had never happened would suddenly feel real. The fear of losing his fortune whispered into his ears. The desire to gain even more pushed him forward without rest. His body sat safely within his home, yet his thoughts wandered through thousands of imagined disasters before dawn arrived. Some mornings he awoke more exhausted than when he had gone to bed. He purchased larger houses. The silence only grew louder. He traveled to beautiful places. His worries packed themselves before he even arrived. He hosted magnificent feasts, yet laughter disappeared the moment the guests returned home. Eventually, a question began haunting him more than all the others. If success cannot calm the mind, what can? One elderly traveler heard his question and quietly replied, "There is an old monk who lives beyond the northern mountains. They say he owns almost nothing, but no one has ever seen worry upon his face." The young merchant laughed at first. How could a poor monk teach a wealthy man about life? Yet days later, when another sleepless night passed beneath an empty ceiling, the laughter disappeared. Sometimes, desperation opens a door that pride has kept locked for years. So before sunrise, without announcing his journey to anyone, the merchant mounted his horse and rode toward the mountains. For 7 days he traveled. He crossed rivers whose waters reflected the morning sky. He passed villages where children smiled despite possessing almost nothing. He climbed steep paths where every breath reminded him how heavy both his body and his heart had become. Finally, as the evening sun painted the clouds with shades of amber and crimson, he arrived at the monastery. No servants greeted him, no guards announced his name, no one seemed impressed by his wealth. Only an old monk was sweeping fallen leaves from the stone courtyard. His movements were slow, gentle, unhurried. He swept each leaf with the same attention a master artist gives to a painting. The merchant watched in silence. He had never seen someone perform such an ordinary task, with such extraordinary peace. At last, he stepped forward and bowed. "Master," he said quietly, "I have crossed mountains searching for something money has never been able to buy." The monk rested his broom against the wall. He looked into the young man's tired eyes, then he smiled, not the smile of someone amused, nor the smile of someone judging. It was the smile of one who had seen this journey many times before. "My son," the monk said softly, "before we speak of calming the mind, you must first understand why the mind refuses to be calm." The wind moved gently through the ancient Bodhi tree. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell echoed across the valley. The merchant did not yet realize it, but the greatest journey of his life had only just begun. The morning after his arrival, the young merchant woke before sunrise. For many years, he had rarely seen this hour. In the city, his mornings were filled with noise, the sound of servants opening doors, the voices of workers reporting business matters, the movement of people rushing to begin another day. But here, deep inside the mountains, there was only silence, a silence so deep that he could hear the sound of his own breathing. At first, the merchant found it uncomfortable. The silence seemed empty, almost frightening. For the first time in many years, there was nothing to distract him from his own thoughts, no meetings, no business decisions, no people asking for his attention, only himself, and the endless movement of his mind. He sat outside the small wooden room where he was staying. The sky was still dark. The stars slowly disappeared as the first light of morning touched the mountains. Then he saw the old monk walking toward him. The monk carried 2 cups of tea. He sat beside the merchant without saying anything, for several minutes. They simply watched the sunrise. Finally, the merchant spoke. "Master, I came here because I want to calm my mind, but I have discovered something." The monk looked at him. "What have you discovered?" The merchant lowered his eyes. "I discovered that my mind is much louder than I imagined." The old monk smiled gently. "Good." The merchant looked surprised. "Good? Why would it be good to discover that my mind is restless?" The monk slowly poured tea into the cup. "Because you cannot heal a problem that you refuse to see. Many people spend their entire lives running away from their own minds. They cover their worries with entertainment. They cover their loneliness with possessions. They cover their fears with ambition. But when the world becomes quiet, the mind reveals what has always been there." The merchant looked into his tea. The surface of the water reflected his tired face. After finishing their tea, the monk stood up. "Come with me." They walked along a narrow mountain path. The air became colder as they climbed higher. The merchant followed silently. After walking for almost an hour, they reached the top of a hill. From there, they could see the entire valley below. The monk pointed toward the sky. Dark clouds were gathering in the distance. A storm was approaching. The merchant looked worried. "We should return before the rain arrives." The monk did not move. "Why?" The merchant looked confused. "Because the storm is coming." The monk smiled. "Is the storm dangerous?" The merchant thought for a moment. "If it becomes strong enough, it can destroy trees and damage houses." The monk nodded. "Yes, but tell me, is the sky itself destroyed by the storm?" The merchant became silent. "No, the clouds come, the wind comes, the rain comes, but the sky remains." The monk picked up a small branch from the ground. "Your mind is like the sky, your thoughts are like clouds. Sometimes anger appears, sometimes fear appears, sometimes sadness appears, sometimes endless desires appear. Because these clouds cover your awareness, you believe you have become the clouds, but you are not the clouds. You are the sky that observes them." The first drops of rain began to fall. The merchant watched the clouds moving across the mountain. For a moment, he understood. His thoughts were not the enemy. His fears were not something he needed to destroy. The suffering came because he had believed every thought that appeared in his mind. when his mind whispered, "You are not successful enough," he believed it. When his mind whispered, "You may lose everything tomorrow," he believed it. When his mind reminded him of past mistakes, he carried those memories as if they were happening again. The monk watched his expression change. "You have spent many years fighting storms outside, business problems, people's opinions, unexpected events, but you never noticed the storm inside," the merchant asked quietly. "Then how do I stop this storm?" The monk looked toward the rain. "Can you command the clouds to disappear? No. Can you force the wind to stop? No. Then why do you try to control every thought that appears in your mind?" The merchant remained silent. The monk continued, "The peaceful person is not someone who never experiences storms. The peaceful person is someone who learns not to lose himself inside the storm." The rain became heavier. The two of them returned slowly to the monastery. The merchant walked differently now. His problems had not disappeared. His fortune had not changed. His responsibilities were still waiting for him, but something inside him had changed. For the first time, he saw his thoughts from a distance. That evening, before sleeping, he sat quietly beside the small pond near the monastery. A leaf floated on the water. The wind moved it gently. He remembered the monk's words, "You are not the clouds. You are the sky." For many years, he had tried to control everything around him, but perhaps the first thing he needed to understand was himself. The next morning, the merchant returned to the monk. "I understand something now," he said, "but I still have a question." The monk smiled. "What question?" The merchant looked toward the forest. "If thoughts are like clouds, why do they keep coming?" The monk looked at the trees moving in the wind. "Because, my son, the mind has learned to wander, and tomorrow, you will learn why the human mind is like a restless monkey that never stops jumping from branch to branch." The morning sun slowly entered the monastery courtyard. The golden light touched the old wooden walls. The birds began their morning songs. The world around the monastery was peaceful, yet inside the young merchant's mind, a different world was awakening. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, watching the leaves move gently with the wind. He tried to remain still. He tried to follow his breathing, but almost immediately, thoughts began appearing. A memory from 10 years ago, a conversation he regretted, a business decision he was afraid might fail, a future possibility that had not even happened. One thought disappeared, another immediately replaced it. It was like standing beside a river during a storm. The water never stopped moving. After some time, the old monk approached him. "You seem troubled today." The merchant smiled sadly. "Master, yesterday you taught me that thoughts are like clouds. I tried to observe them, but I discovered something. My mind creates more clouds than the sky itself." The monk laughed softly. "Then today, you have discovered one of the oldest mysteries of human existence." "What mystery is that?" "The restless nature of the mind." The monk invited the merchant to walk with him into the forest. After a short journey, they arrived at a place where several monkeys lived among the trees. The merchant watched them jump from branch to branch. One monkey grabbed a fruit. Before finishing it, it noticed another fruit nearby. It immediately dropped the first one and moved toward the second. Then it saw a bird flying above. It forgot the fruit. Then it chased the bird. A moment later, it became interested in something else. The merchant watched carefully. "They cannot stay still for even a moment." The monk nodded. That is why ancient teachers often compared the untrained mind to a monkey. It jumps from one desire to another, from one fear to another, from one memory to another. It constantly searches for something new. The merchant looked thoughtful. "Are you saying my mind is like that monkey?" The monk smiled. "Not only your mind. Every human mind has this tendency. The difference is that some people recognize it, while others spend their entire lives being controlled by it." The monk picked up a small stone and placed it in the merchant's hand. "Hold this." The merchant held the stone. "Now walk with me." They continued through the forest. After a few minutes, the stone felt slightly heavy. After an hour, it became uncomfortable. Finally, the merchant stopped. "Master, This stone is becoming painful. The monk looked at him. How much does it weigh? The merchant looked at the stone. Perhaps only a few 100 grams. The monk nodded. Interesting. The stone itself has not changed. It is still the same weight. So why does it feel heavier now? The merchant thought carefully. Because I have been holding it for a long time. Exactly. The monk looked at him. The same thing happens with thoughts. A thought appearing in the mind is not the problem, but when we hold on to it, when we repeat it again and again, when we build an entire story around it, the small stone becomes a mountain. The merchant remembered the nights he could not sleep. He remembered how one small mistake from the past became a source of endless suffering. A single failure in business, a single harsh word from someone, a single moment of embarrassment. The event itself lasted only a short time, but his mind had carried it for years. The monk continued. Human beings often suffer twice. First, because something difficult happens. Second, because the mind keeps bringing that difficulty back again and again. The first pain belongs to life. The second pain is created by our attachment to the experience. The merchant remained quiet. Then he asked, but master, if we stop thinking about the past and future, does that mean we become careless? The monk smiled. A wise person learns from the past. A foolish person lives inside the past. A wise person prepares for the future. A frightened person sacrifices the present because of the future. The problem is not remembering. The problem is being trapped. That evening, the monk gave the merchant a simple practice. Tomorrow morning, sit beside the pond. Do not fight your thoughts. Do not follow your thoughts. Simply watch. The merchant asked, what should I watch for? The monk replied, watch how quickly your mind tries to leave the present moment. Watch how it creates stories. Watch how it searches for problems even when everything is peaceful. Then you will begin to understand your own mind. The next morning, the merchant sat beside the pond. At first, he thought meditation would bring silence, but instead, his mind became even louder. Thought after thought appeared. What if my business fails? What if people forget my name? What if I lose everything? He almost became frustrated, but then he remembered the monk's words. Do not fight, do not follow, simply watch. Slowly, something changed. He noticed that thoughts came and went. A fearful thought appeared, then disappeared. A memory appeared, then disappeared. A desire appeared, then disappeared. For the first time, he experienced a small space between himself and his thoughts, and within that small space, there was peace. When the monk saw him later that day, he asked, what did you discover? The merchant bowed. I discovered that my mind is always moving, but I also discovered something else. What? I am not required to follow every movement. The monk smiled. Good. That is the beginning of wisdom. The evening sky turned orange as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The merchant looked calmer than before, but the monk knew the journey had only begun. Understanding the restless mind was only the first step. The next lesson would be more difficult, because even after seeing the movement of the mind, humans still carry invisible chains. Chains made from memories, chains made from regrets, chains made from things they cannot let go. The monk looked toward the distant river and quietly said, tomorrow, we will talk about the heaviest burden a person can carry, the weight of yesterday. The third morning arrived quietly at the mountain monastery. A thin layer of mist covered the valley. The trees stood still, as if the entire forest was meditating with the rising sun. The young merchant sat beside the pond, continuing the practice the old monk had given him. At first, it was difficult. His mind still wandered. It searched through old memories. It created worries about the future. It tried to escape the present moment, but slowly, he began to notice something important. The mind was not always his enemy. Sometimes, the mind was simply carrying things it had never learned to release. That morning, when the monk approached him, the merchant looked different. The restlessness in his eyes had become softer. The monk sat beside him. Tell me. The monk asked, what did you see when you watched your mind? The merchant looked at the quiet water. I saw many thoughts. Some were about tomorrow, but many were about yesterday. The monk nodded. And which ones were heavier? The merchant became silent. After a moment, he answered, the ones from yesterday. The monk picked up a small wooden bowl. Inside the bowl were several stones. Some were smooth and beautiful, others were rough and broken. The monk handed the bowl to the merchant. Carry this with you today. The merchant accepted it. At first, the bowl felt light. He walked through the monastery. He helped the monks prepare food. He cleaned the garden. He carried water from the river. But as the hours passed, his arms became tired. By the afternoon, he returned to the monk. Master, why did you ask me to carry this? The monk smiled. How does it feel? Heavier than I expected. The monk nodded. That is how the past feels. The merchant looked confused. But these stones are real, of course, and memories are not stones. The monk looked at him. Are you certain? The merchant became quiet. The monk continued. A stone exists in your hand, a memory exists in your mind, but both can create weight. The monk picked up one stone. This stone represents a mistake you made. He picked up another. This one represents a painful word someone spoke to you. Another stone. This one represents something you lost. Another. This one represents a person you cannot forgive. The merchant stared at the bowl. He suddenly understood. Every person carries invisible stones. Some people carry them for years. Some carry them for their entire lives. They wake up carrying them. They work carrying them. They sleep carrying them. And one day they wonder, why am I so tired? Without realizing, it was not life itself that exhausted them. It was the weight they refused to put down. The merchant lowered his head. Master, I understand what you mean, but some memories are painful. How can someone simply let them go? The monk looked at the river flowing nearby. Do you see the river? Yes. Does the river keep yesterday's water? The merchant watched carefully. No, every moment, new water arrives, and the old water continues its journey. The monk smiled. Life is like this river, but the human mind is strange. It takes yesterday's water, places it inside a container, and carries it everywhere. Then it wonders why it cannot feel fresh. The merchant remained silent. Then an old memory appeared, a memory he had tried to forget, many years ago. When he was still young, his father had given him a small family business. His father trusted him, but during his first year, he made a serious mistake. The business lost a large amount of money. His father never blamed him. He simply said, failure is a teacher. But the young merchant could not forgive himself. From that day forward, he worked harder, he earned more money, he became successful, but deep inside, he was still trying to prove that he was not the same person who had failed years ago. The monk looked at him. You are remembering something. The merchant was surprised. How did you know? Because your eyes changed. The merchant looked down. I made a mistake when I was young. My father forgave me, but I never forgave myself. The monk was silent for a long time. Then he said, many people believe forgiveness is something we give to others, but sometimes, the person who needs forgiveness the most, is ourselves. The merchant looked at the monk. But if I forgive myself, does that mean I ignore my mistake? No. The monk shook his head. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is understanding. You can remember a lesson without continuing to punish yourself. A wise person learns from the past, but an unpeaceful person becomes a prisoner of the past. The monk took the bowl from the merchant's hands. He walked toward the pond. Then one by one, he placed the stones into the water. Splash! Another stone disappeared beneath the surface. Splash! Another burden was released. The merchant watched quietly. The monk turned back. Notice something. The stones did not disappear. They are still there, but you are no longer carrying them. The merchant felt a deep silence inside his heart. For years, he had believed peace would come when he achieved more wealth, more respect, more success. But perhaps peace was not something he needed to obtain. Perhaps peace was something he needed to stop blocking. That evening, the merchant sat alone beneath the Bodhi tree. He thought about his life, the mistakes he made, the people who hurt him, the things he lost. But this time, he looked at them differently. They were chapters of his story, not chains around his soul. The moon appeared above the mountain, the same moon that had watched his suffering for many years, but tonight, the merchant saw it with different eyes. The next morning, he returned to the monk. "Master, yesterday I learned that the past can become a burden." The monk nodded. "But I still have another question." "What is it?" The merchant looked toward the distant road. "If the past creates suffering, why does the mind keep creating fears about the future?" The old monk smiled. "Because the mind does not only live behind you, it also runs ahead of you. Tomorrow, you will learn about the invisible prison created by a future that does not yet exist." The morning air was colder than usual. A gentle wind moved through the monastery, carrying the scent of pine trees from the mountains. The young merchant woke early again. Something inside him had changed. Before arriving at the monastery, silence had frightened him. He used to fill every empty moment with activity, a conversation, a business plan, a new goal, a new desire, anything to avoid meeting himself. But now, he had begun to understand the value of stillness. Yet there was one place his mind continued to return to, a place that created more anxiety than the past, the future. After breakfast, the merchant found the old monk sitting beside the river. The monk was watching the water flow over the stones. The merchant bowed. "Master." The monk smiled. "You have another question." The merchant laughed softly. "How do you always know?" The monk touched the river with his hand. "Because the human mind is like this river. It follows the same patterns. Yesterday, it carried you backward. Today, it wants to carry you forward." The merchant sat down. "Master, I understand that I should not be trapped by the past, but how can I stop worrying about the future? I have responsibilities, I have people who depend on me, I cannot simply ignore tomorrow." The monk nodded. "You are correct. A person without wisdom ignores the future, but a person without peace lives only in the future." The monk pointed toward the mountain path. "Come with me." They walked until they reached a small farmer's house. An old farmer was planting seeds in the field. The merchant watched him carefully. The farmer moved slowly, calmly. He prepared the soil, he planted the seeds, then he returned home. The merchant was confused. "Master, why did the farmer stop? Those seeds need water, they need sunlight, they need time. Why does he not stay there all day watching them?" The monk smiled. "Because the farmer understands something important. He knows his responsibility, but he also understands his limitation. He can plant the seed, he can water the soil, he can protect the field, but he cannot command the seed to grow faster." The monk looked at the merchant. "Many people are like impatient farmers. They plant the seeds of their future, then every day they dig into the soil to check if the seed has grown." The merchant smiled. "That would destroy the plant." "Exactly, and yet people do this with their lives. They worry about results before the time has arrived. They imagine failures that have not happened. They suffer from storms that exist only in their imagination." The merchant became quiet, because he knew the monk was speaking about him. How many nights had he spent imagining disasters? What if his business failed? What if his competitors became stronger? What if people stopped respecting him? What if everything he built disappeared? These thoughts had never actually happened, but they had stolen thousands of peaceful moments from his life. He had been punished by events that existed only inside his mind. The monk picked up a small flower beside the path. "Look at this flower. It does not worry about tomorrow. It does not ask, will the sun rise? It does not ask, will people admire me? It simply opens when the conditions are right." The merchant looked at the flower. "But humans are different from flowers. We must plan. We must think." The monk nodded. "Yes, the difference is not between thinking and not thinking, the difference is between wisdom and anxiety. Wise thinking asks, what can I do today? Anxiety asks, what if everything goes wrong? Wise thinking creates action, anxiety creates suffering." The monk paused. "Planning is useful, fear is exhausting, preparation brings peace, endless imagination brings suffering." That evening, the merchant returned to his room. He took a piece of paper and wrote down everything he feared about the future. The list was long, much longer than he expected. Then he looked at each fear carefully. He asked himself, can I do something about this today? If the answer was yes, he wrote down an action. If the answer was no, he practiced letting it go. Slowly, something unexpected happened. The list did not disappear, but its power over him became weaker. He realized that many fears were not problems waiting to be solved. They were shadows created by the mind. Several days passed. The merchant continued learning from the monk. He became calmer, he slept more peacefully, he listened more carefully. But one morning, while walking through the forest, he noticed something. Even though he understood the past and future better, his heart still held many desires. He still wanted success, he still wanted recognition, he still wanted people to admire him. The monk noticed his expression. You have learned how the mind travels backward. You have learned how the mind runs forward. Now you must learn why the mind keeps reaching outward. The merchant asked, what do you mean? The monk looked at the endless forest. Tomorrow, we will speak about the deepest attachment of the human heart, the belief that something outside ourselves can finally complete us. The merchant looked at the mountains. For the first time, he wondered, is it possible that I have spent my entire life searching for something that was never outside me? The wind moved through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the temple bell rang. The days continued to pass quietly at the mountain monastery. The young merchant no longer felt like the same person who had arrived weeks before. When he first climbed the mountain, he carried a heavy invisible burden, the burden of a restless mind, the weight of past mistakes, the fear of an uncertain future, the endless desire to become someone greater than he already was. But slowly, through silence, through observation, through the guidance of the old monk, he had begun to see the movements of his own heart. Yet there was still something hidden beneath everything, something deeper, something more difficult to recognize. One morning, while they were walking through the forest, the merchant spoke. Master, I understand now that my thoughts create suffering. I understand that I should not live in the past or fear the future. But there is still a question inside me. The monk looked at him. What question? The merchant stopped walking. Why do I always feel that I need more? Even when I achieve something, I immediately begin searching for the next thing. Why does satisfaction disappear so quickly? The old monk smiled. You have arrived at an important door. What door? The door of attachment. The monk continued walking until they reached a small village near the mountain. There lived an old scholar who was famous throughout the region. People traveled from far away to ask him questions. He had studied thousands of books. He knew history, philosophy, medicine, politics, religion. Everyone believed he possessed great wisdom. One day, a young student visited him. The student bowed respectfully. Master, I have traveled a great distance because I wish to learn from your wisdom. The scholar smiled proudly. Excellent, sit down, and I will share my knowledge with you. The scholar began speaking. He talked about philosophy, he explained ancient teachings, he described his discoveries. But after several hours, the student noticed something strange. The scholar never stopped speaking, he never asked a question, he never listened. Finally, the student said, Master, may I offer you some tea? The scholar agreed. The student brought a cup and began pouring. The tea reached the top, but he continued pouring. Soon, the tea overflowed onto the table. The scholar immediately stopped him. Enough. Cannot you see the cup is already full? The student placed the teapot down. Master, you are like this cup. The scholar looked surprised. What do you mean? The student replied. Your mind is filled with your own knowledge, your own opinions, and your own beliefs. How can new wisdom enter if there is no empty space? The old monk finished telling the story. The merchant remained silent. He understood, because he realized that he had lived in the same way. His cup had always been full, full of achievements, full of pride, full of expectations, full of the image of who he believed he should become. He had not only collected wealth, he had collected identities. I am a successful businessman. I must always win. I must never fail. I must be respected. I must become greater. These thoughts had built a comfortable house around him, but slowly, that house became a prison. The monk picked up a small cup from beside the path. Inside the cup were a few drops of water. Tell me. The monk said, can I add more water into this cup? The merchant looked at it. No. Why? Because it is already full. The monk nodded. Exactly. The problem is not that life has nothing more to offer. The problem is that many people have no space left to receive it. The merchant looked at the mountains. Master, are you saying we should have no goals? The monk smiled. No, a person without goals is like a boat without direction, but a person who believes happiness exists only after reaching a goal, is like a traveler who keeps walking but never arrives. Goals can guide your steps, but attachment controls your heart. The monk pointed toward a tree beside the road. Look at this tree. It grows, it reaches toward the sky, but does it hold on to every leaf? The merchant looked at the tree. No, when the season changes, the leaves fall. The monk nodded. The tree does not suffer because it loses leaves, because it understands that letting go is part of life. Humans suffer because they hold tightly to things that were never meant to stay forever. The merchant thought about his own life. He remembered the houses he bought, the treasures he collected, the reputation he protected, the people whose approval he constantly searched for. He had believed these things gave him security, but now he saw something different. The more he depended on them, the more afraid he became of losing them. A person who owns nothing may fear losing nothing, but a person who believes everything belongs to him, lives with constant fear. That evening, the monk gave the merchant a simple exercise. Tomorrow, choose something you value. The merchant asked, something valuable? Yes. Then observe your mind when you imagine losing it. The merchant looked uncertain. Why would I do that? Because you cannot understand attachment until you see where your fear begins. The next morning, the merchant sat beside the pond. He thought about his wealth, his businesses, his name, his achievements. Then he imagined losing them. At first, his heart became heavy. Fear appeared, but instead of running away from the feeling, he observed it. He watched the fear eyes, he watched it remain, then slowly, he watched it disappear, and in that moment, he understood something important. The things he loved were not the problem was believing, I cannot be peaceful without them. When he returned to the monk, the old teacher smiled. You learned something today. The merchant nodded. Yes, I thought I needed more things to become peaceful, but perhaps I need fewer chains. The monk looked pleased. Good, because the person who needs nothing from the world, is the person who can truly appreciate everything in the world. That night, the merchant sat beneath the Bodhi tree, the same place where he had once struggled with endless thoughts, but now the silence felt different. It was no longer empty, it was peaceful. He looked at the moon reflected on the pond. The reflection moved with the water, yet the moon itself remained unchanged. For the first time, he began to understand. Peace does not come from making life perfect. Peace comes from changing the way we hold life. The next morning, the merchant returned to the monk with another question. Master, I have learned to observe my thoughts. I have learned to release the past. I have learned not to chase the future. I have learned that attachment creates suffering, but there is still something I do not understand. The monk looked at him. What is that? The merchant looked toward the village below. How can a person remain peaceful while living among people? Responsibilities and difficulties? The old monk smiled. That is the next lesson, because true peace is not found only on a quiet mountain. True peace must also survive in the middle of life. The morning after his conversation about attachment, the young merchant woke with a different feeling. For many years, he had believed that peace belonged to certain places, a quiet mountain, a beautiful garden, a temple far away from ordinary life. That was why he had escaped to the monastery. He believed that if he could leave behind the noise of the world, he would finally discover peace. But after many days of learning from the old monk, he began to understand something deeper. Perhaps peace was not a place, perhaps peace was a way of seeing. That morning, the monk asked him to prepare for a journey. Where are we going? The merchant asked. Down the mountain. The merchant was surprised. Down the mountain? Yes, but I came here to escape the world. The monk smiled. And what have you learned here? The merchant thought carefully. I learned to observe my mind. I learned to let go of the past. I learned not to be controlled by the future. I learned that attachment creates suffering. The monk nodded. Good, then it is time to return to the world. The merchant looked confused. Why? The monk answered. Because anyone can appear peaceful when nothing challenges them. The true test of peace is whether you can remain calm when life becomes difficult. They walked down the mountain for several hours. Eventually, they reached a busy village. The sound was completely different from the monastery. People were shouting. Merchants were selling goods. Children were running through the streets. Animals moved between the crowded paths. The merchant immediately felt his old habits returning. His mind began analyzing everything: the noise, the people, the movement, the endless activity. He looked at the monk. Master, how can anyone find peace here? The monk smiled. That is the question you must answer. They entered a small marketplace. The monk sat near a fountain. Close your eyes. The merchant hesitated. Here? Yes. In the middle of all this noise? The monk nodded. The merchant closed his eyes. At first, everything seemed overwhelming. A person's voice, a horse walking nearby, a child laughing, a merchant calling customers, his own thoughts complaining about the noise. He wanted to escape. He wanted to return to the quiet monastery, but then he remembered the lessons. Do not fight, do not follow, simply observe. Slowly, he began listening differently. Before, he heard noise as a disturbance. Now, he heard sounds simply as sounds. A voice was just a voice, a sound was just a sound, a thought was just a thought. Nothing needed to be rejected, nothing needed to be controlled. And for a brief moment, something surprising happened. The marketplace was still noisy, the people were still moving, the world had not changed, but inside him, there was a quiet space. When he opened his eyes, the monk asked, "What did you discover?" The merchant smiled. The noise did not disappear. Correct, but my struggle with the noise disappeared. The monk nodded. That is an important realization. Many people believe peace means removing everything unpleasant from life. They want no problems, no difficult people, no unexpected events, but life does not work that way. The monk picked up a small piece of wood from the ground. When a tree grows in a forest, does it complain about the wind? No. Does it become angry when rain falls? No. Why? Because the tree understands that these things are part of nature. The monk looked at the merchant. Human beings suffer because they expect life to follow their personal wishes. When reality does not obey, they create conflict inside themselves. The merchant thought about his own life. He had always wanted the world to be arranged according to his desires. He wanted business to always succeed. He wanted people to always respect him. He wanted plans to always work. Whenever something unexpected happened, his mind created resistance. The event itself was not always painful. His resistance toward the event created the suffering. The monk continued. Imagine you are standing in the rain. You have two choices. You can spend your entire time complaining, "Why is the rain here?" Or you can accept, "The rain is here." What is the wisest action now? The rain may not stop, but your suffering can. The merchant looked at the people around him. A poor farmer carrying vegetables, a mother holding her child's hand, an old man walking slowly with a wooden stick. Everyone carried their own difficulties, yet some people still smiled, some people still laughed, some people still found moments of happiness. He realized something. Peace was not reserved for people without problems. Peace belonged to those who learned how to meet problems with a clear mind. That evening, before returning to the monastery, the merchant asked, "Master, how can I remember this when I return to my normal life?" The monk answered, "Do not try to create a special peaceful life. Learn to bring a peaceful mind into your ordinary life. When you eat, only eat. When you walk, only walk. When you listen, truly listen. When you work, give your full attention. The mind becomes peaceful when it stops living everywhere except where the body is. The merchant remembered how many meals he had eaten while thinking about business, how many conversations he had missed because his mind was somewhere else, how many beautiful moments had passed because he was chasing another moment. He finally understood. Life was not disappearing, he was disappearing from life. When they returned to the mountain monastery, the sun was setting. The golden light covered the path they had walked many times before, but the merchant saw it differently. The same mountain, the same trees, the same sky, yet his mind had changed. The monk looked at him and said, "Today you learned an important lesson. Peace is not found by escaping the world. Peace is found when the world no longer controls your mind." That night, the merchant sat beside the pond. He watched the reflection of the moon moving across the water. Before, he would have tried to make the water perfectly still. Now, he simply watched. The waves came, the waves went, the moon remained. The next morning, the merchant approached the monk. "Master, I understand that I cannot control everything outside me. I understand that I must learn to accept life as it comes. But there is one thing I still struggle with." The monk looked at him. "What is it?" The merchant lowered his head. "Even when I understand these teachings, sometimes anger still appears. Sometimes people hurt me. Sometimes my heart reacts before my wisdom can respond." The monk smiled. "Then tomorrow, we will enter one of the deepest chambers of the human heart. We will learn about anger, and why the fire we create inside ourselves often burns us before it reaches anyone else." The morning arrived quietly at the mountain monastery. The wind moved gently through the trees. The birds sang above the old wooden roofs. Everything around the monastery appeared peaceful. But the old monk knew something important. A calm environment does not always mean a calm heart. A person can sit beside a beautiful lake, and still carry a storm inside. That morning, the young merchant sat beside the Bodhi tree. His face was peaceful, his breathing was steady, but deep within his heart, there was a memory that still created pain. A person who had betrayed him many years ago, a business partner who had broken his trust, a friend who had taken advantage of his kindness. Although many years had passed, the anger remained. Sometimes, when he remembered that person, his heart became heavy, his peaceful mind disappeared. When the old monk approached, he immediately noticed the change. "You are carrying something today." The merchant looked surprised. "How did you know?" The monk smiled. "The face can hide many things, but the heart always reveals its weight." The merchant lowered his eyes. "Master, I thought I had learned to let go, but there is still anger inside me." The monk sat beside him. "Then today, we will learn about fire." The merchant looked confused. "Fire?" The monk nodded. "Yes, because anger is like fire. It begins as something small, a single spark, a single painful memory, a single moment of feeling wronged. But if we continue feeding it, it grows until it controls everything around it." The monk took the merchant to a small area near the forest where villagers sometimes gathered wood for cooking. He picked up 2 pieces of wood. Imagine these 2 pieces of wood represent 2 people in conflict. He placed them beside each other. When one person says something hurtful, the first spark appears, the second person responds with anger, and the fire grows. Then both people believe they are protecting themselves, but both are adding more fuel to the same fire. The merchant asked, "Master, if someone hurts us, should we not defend ourselves?" The monk nodded. "Of course, wisdom does not mean allowing others to harm you. Compassion does not mean becoming weak, but there is a difference between protecting yourself and destroying your own peace because of another person's actions." The merchant became quiet. The monk continued, "Imagine someone throws a burning piece of coal at you. What would you do?" "I would drop it immediately." "Why?" "Because it would burn my hand." The monk looked at him. "Anger is the same. When you hold it, you are the first person who suffers." The merchant remembered many moments from his life, arguments with business partners, harsh words spoken in moments of frustration, sleepless nights thinking about revenge. He had believed that holding anger meant he was strong, but now he wondered, was I protecting myself? Or was I allowing another person to continue hurting me through my own thoughts? The monk walked toward the river. Look at the water. The merchant looked. A small leaf was floating on the surface. Does the river become angry when a leaf falls into it? No. Does it spend years remembering the leaf? The merchant smiled. No. The monk nodded. The river allows things to come. It allows things to go. That is why it remains flowing. Human beings are different. We often hold on to what has already disappeared. Someone says one painful sentence. The sentence lasts only a few seconds, but we repeat it in our minds for years. Someone makes one mistake, but we allow that mistake to occupy our heart every day. The event ends, but the suffering continues because the mind keeps rebuilding it. The merchant asked, "Then how do we release anger?" The monk looked at the sky. First, understand that anger is not your identity. When anger appears, many people say, "I am angry," but a wiser person says, "Anger has appeared in my mind." There is a difference. The merchant listened carefully. If you become anger, anger controls you, but if you observe anger, you create space between yourself and the emotion. The monk then told him a story. Long ago, there was a man who hated his enemy for many years. He carried bitterness everywhere. One day, a wise teacher asked him, "Why do you carry a bag of stones everywhere you go?" The man replied, "These are the stones my enemy gave me." The teacher smiled and said, "Perhaps your enemy placed the first stone in your bag, but every day you choose to carry the bag yourself." The merchant remained silent. The story touched something deep within him, because he realized, the person who hurt him years ago was no longer present, but the anger was still alive, and he was the one keeping it alive. That evening, the monk gave him a simple practice. When anger appears, do not immediately speak, do not immediately act. First, observe, feel the heat in your body, notice the thoughts, notice the desire to hurt back. Then ask yourself, will my action create peace, or will it create another fire? The merchant practiced this teaching. Days passed. He noticed something surprising. Anger still appeared, but it became weaker. Before, anger arrived like a powerful storm. Now, it was like a small cloud passing through the sky. It appeared, he noticed it, and he let it move away. One evening, while watching the sunset, the merchant said, "Master, I used to think peace meant never feeling anger, but now I understand. Peace means not becoming a prisoner of anger." The monk smiled. Good. Remember this. A person who controls others may have power, but a person who controls their own mind has true freedom. The merchant looked toward the valley below. For the first time in many years, he felt compassion toward the person who had hurt him, not because what happened was acceptable, not because the pain was meaningless, but because he understood something. A person who causes harm is often carrying their own suffering, and hatred only creates another wound. That night, the merchant sat beneath the Bodhi tree, the same place where he had once arrived with a restless mind. Now, slowly, his heart was becoming lighter, but the monk knew there was still another lesson waiting, because even after learning to calm thoughts, release the past, accept the present, and transform anger, there remained one final question. How can a person live with a peaceful heart and share that peace with others? The next morning, the merchant approached the monk. "Master, I have learned how to calm my own mind, but is inner peace only for myself?" The monk smiled. "No, the deepest peace naturally becomes kindness. Tomorrow, you will learn about the greatest medicine of the heart, compassion." Several weeks had passed since the merchant first arrived at the mountain monastery. When he looked back at the person he used to be, it almost felt like remembering a stranger. The man who had climbed the mountain carrying wealth, pride, fear, and endless thoughts was slowly disappearing. He had learned many lessons. He learned that thoughts were not his master. He learned that the past was not a prison. He learned that the future was not a place where he needed to live. He learned that anger only burned the person who carried it. He learned that attachment could turn even valuable things into chains. And because of these lessons, his mind had become quieter. But the old monk knew something. A quiet mind was only the beginning. There was still a deeper transformation waiting, because a person can become calm, but still remain closed. A person can find peace, but still only think about themselves. The monk wanted the merchant to discover a greater truth. The purpose of inner peace is not only to free ourselves from suffering, it is to become someone who can bring peace to others. One afternoon, while the merchant was helping the monks prepare food, the old monk suddenly said, "Tomorrow, we will leave the monastery." The merchant looked surprised. "Where are we going?" "To the village below the mountain." "The village?" The monk nodded. "There are people who need help." The merchant looked toward the peaceful monastery. "Master, is there not peace here?" The monk smiled. "There is peace here, but wisdom that stays only in one place is incomplete. A lamp is not created only to shine for itself. Its purpose is to remove darkness for others." The next day, they walked down the mountain path. After several hours, they reached a small village beside the river, but the village was not like the peaceful place the merchant remembered. The recent storm had destroyed many homes. Broken wooden walls lay scattered across the ground. Farmers were trying to repair their fields. Families were carrying what remained of their belongings. Children walked through the village quietly, no longer playing as they once did. The merchant looked around. His heart became heavy. "Master, these people have lost almost everything." The monk nodded. "Yes." The merchant looked confused. "But how can they remain calm?" As they walked through the village, they saw an old farmer sitting beside his damaged house. The merchant recognized something strange. The man was smiling, not a forced smile, not a smile pretending everything was fine, a peaceful smile. The monk approached him. "How is your family?" The farmer bowed. "They are safe." "Then you are fortunate." The monk replied. The merchant looked at the destroyed house. "But your home is gone." The old farmer looked at the broken walls. Then he looked toward his family. "A house can be rebuilt, but if my heart loses gratitude, no one can rebuild it for me." The merchant remained silent. Those words touched him deeply. For years, he had protected his possessions as if they were his life. He had believed, "If I lose my wealth, I lose my happiness." But this farmer had lost almost everything, and still possessed something the merchant had spent years searching for: peace. Later that day, they saw a young woman giving food to another family. The merchant noticed that she had very little herself. He asked, "Why are you sharing what you have?" The woman smiled, "Because they need it, but you also need it." She looked at him gently. When someone is suffering, their pain becomes part of our world. Helping them does not make my life smaller, it makes my heart larger. That evening, the merchant sat beside the village river. He watched people helping one another. No one asked, "How much will I receive? Will people remember my kindness? Will I gain something from this?" They simply helped, and in that simplicity, he discovered something profound. The merchant spoke to the monk. "Master, I used to think happiness came from having more wealth, more success, more recognition, but today I saw people who have less than me, yet their hearts seem richer." The monk nodded. Because happiness does not grow only through possession, it also grows through connection. The monk picked up a small candle. At night, he lit it and placed it in the center of the village. "Look at this flame." The merchant watched. "If this candle lights another candle, does the first flame become smaller? No. Does it lose its brightness? No." The monk smiled. "This is compassion. When you share kindness, you do not become empty, you become brighter." The merchant thought about his old life. He had spent years building walls around himself, protecting his wealth, protecting his reputation, protecting his image. But those walls had also separated him from others. He had been so focused on protecting his own happiness, that he forgot happiness grows when it is shared. The monk asked, "Tell me, what is the difference between pity and compassion?" The merchant thought. Pity is feeling sorry for someone's suffering. Compassion is understanding their suffering and wanting to help. The monk nodded. Exactly. Pity looks down. Compassion stands beside. Pity says, "I am fortunate that I am not you." Compassion says, Your suffering and my suffering are connected. That night, before sleeping, the merchant helped repair a family's damaged home. His hands became dirty, his expensive clothes became covered with dust, but strangely, he felt happier than during any celebration held in his luxurious house. For the first time, he experienced a different kind of wealth, the wealth of giving. When they returned to the monastery several days later, the merchant was quiet. The monk asked, "What did you learn?" The merchant answered, "I thought peace meant protecting myself from suffering, but now I understand. True peace allows me to open my heart to the suffering of others." The monk smiled. "Good, because the heart that only protects itself becomes small, but the heart that understands others becomes limitless." That evening, the merchant sat beside the pond, the same pond where he had once learned about thoughts, attachment, and fear, but now he saw the water differently. A single drop creates ripples. One small act of kindness can travel further than we imagine. A peaceful mind does not end with itself, it touches the world around it. However, the old monk knew the merchant still had one final lesson to learn, because compassion toward others was only possible when a person truly understood one final truth. People change, possessions change, circumstances change, even our own identity changes, and suffering comes when we try to hold on to what was never meant to remain forever. The next day, the merchant approached the monk. "Master, I think I finally understand peace." The monk smiled. "Then there is one final teaching." "What is it?" The monk looked toward the flowing river. "Tomorrow, we will talk about the truth that all wise people eventually discover, the art of letting go." After returning from the village, the merchant noticed something unusual. The world around him had not changed. The mountains were still the same, the monastery was still quiet, the river still flowed through the valley, yet everything appeared different, not because the world had transformed, but because his way of seeing had transformed. For many years, he had looked at life as something he needed to control. He wanted his wealth to remain forever, his success to remain forever, his reputation to remain forever. He wanted the people he loved to always stay beside him. He wanted every beautiful moment to stop moving. But now, after everything he had learned, another question appeared in his heart, a question deeper than all the others. One evening, as the sky began to darken, the old monk invited the merchant to walk with him. They followed a narrow path until they reached the river that flowed beyond the mountain. The river was different from the one they had visited before. It was wider, stronger, its water moved continuously toward the valley below. The merchant sat beside it quietly. The monk asked, "What do you see?" The merchant watched the flowing water. "I see a river." The monk smiled. "Do you?" The merchant looked confused. What else could it be? The monk picked up a small branch and placed it into the water. The branch floated away. "Look carefully. Is the water that touched the branch the same water that passes now?" The merchant watched. "No, every moment, new water arrives." The monk nodded. "And yet we call it the same river." The merchant became thoughtful. The monk continued, "Human beings are like this river. Our bodies change, our thoughts change, our emotions change, our relationships change, our circumstances change, nothing remains exactly the same. Yet we suffer because we expect everything to stay still." The merchant looked down. He remembered his younger years. He remembered his father, his first business, his first success, the people who had once stood beside him. Many things he loved had already changed. Some had disappeared completely, but for years, he had resisted this truth. He had wanted yesterday to return. He had wanted time to obey his wishes. The monk asked, "Have you ever tried to hold water in your hands?" The merchant smiled. "Yes. When I was a child." "What happened?" "It escaped through my fingers." The monk nodded. "That is how life is. The tighter you hold something that must change, the more pain you create." The merchant asked, "Master, does this mean we should not love anything?" The monk looked at him kindly. "No, that is a misunderstanding. Impermanence does not teach us not to love, it teaches us how to love wisely. Imagine seeing a beautiful flower. You know it will eventually fall. Would you refuse to appreciate its beauty because it cannot last forever? The merchant shook his head. No. The monk smiled. Then why do people refuse to appreciate moments simply because they will change? The monk picked up a fallen flower from the ground. Many people think impermanence is a sad teaching, but actually, it is a teaching of gratitude, because things are temporary, they are precious. The sunset is beautiful because it does not stay. The song touches the heart because it eventually ends. A moment becomes meaningful because it cannot be repeated forever. The merchant thought deeply. Before coming to the monastery, he had lived differently. When he had success, he worried about losing it. When he had wealth, he worried about protecting it. When he had happiness, he worried about the day it would disappear. He had spent so much time fearing loss, that he could not fully enjoy what he already had. The monk said, "Many people believe suffering comes from losing things, but often, suffering comes from believing we had the power to keep them forever." The merchant looked at the river. The water never stopped. It never held on to yesterday's current. It never worried about tomorrow's path. It simply moved. That night, the merchant wrote a letter to himself, not a letter about business, not about wealth, not about future plans, a letter about understanding. He wrote, "Everything I love is changing, and because it changes, I must appreciate it while it is here. I do not need to own every moment, I only need to be fully present with it." Several days later, the merchant and the monk walked through the forest. The merchant noticed a tree that had lost many leaves. Before, he might have seen it as something dying, but now, he saw something different. The tree was not losing its life, it was preparing for a new season. The falling leaves were not a tragedy, they were part of the tree's journey. The monk noticed his expression. "You understand now?" The merchant nodded. "I think I do." What? Life does not promise that things will never change, it only gives us the opportunity to experience them while they are here. The monk smiled. That understanding creates freedom. The merchant had traveled to the mountains searching for a way to calm his mind. At first, he thought peace meant making life predictable. Now he understood. Peace was not created by controlling life. Peace was created by flowing with life, like the river, like the wind, like the changing seasons. One evening, as the merchant prepared to leave the monastery, he approached the old monk. "Master, I came here searching for a quiet mind, but I discovered something greater." The monk looked at him. "What did you discover?" The merchant replied, "The mind becomes quiet when the heart stops fighting against the nature of life." The monk smiled, but he knew the final step of the journey remained. The merchant had learned how to observe his thoughts, how to release the past, how to stop chasing the future, how to let go of attachment, how to transform anger, how to open his heart through compassion, how to accept change. But one final question remained. After finding peace within himself, how would he carry that peace back into the world? The next morning, the merchant stood at the gate of the monastery. The road back to the city waited, the same road he had once traveled with a restless heart, but the person who stood there now, was no longer the same. The old monk looked at him and said, "Tomorrow, you will return home, but remember, the greatest test of wisdom is not finding peace on a mountain, it is keeping peace while walking through the world." The day had finally arrived. The young merchant stood at the gate of the mountain monastery, the same gate where, weeks before, he had arrived carrying exhaustion, fear, and countless questions. At that time, he had climbed the mountain searching for something he believed he had lost, peace. Now, as he looked back at the quiet monastery behind him, he realized something. Peace was never something he lost, it was something he had forgotten how to see. The old monk stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The mountains were silent, the river continued flowing, the trees moved gently with the wind, everything seemed exactly the same. But the merchant knew, the world had not changed, he had changed. "Master," the merchant finally said, "when I first came here, I thought you would teach me how to remove suffering from my life." The monk smiled. "And what did you learn?" The merchant looked toward the valley below. I learned that suffering does not always come from life itself, often. It comes from the way my mind holds life. The monk nodded. Continue. The merchant said, I learned that thoughts will come and go. I learned that the past cannot be carried forever. I learned that the future cannot be controlled. I learned that attachment creates fear. I learned that anger burns the person who carries it. I learned that compassion makes the heart larger. I learned that everything changes. The old monk listened quietly, then he asked, after all these lessons, do you believe your mind will never become disturbed again? The merchant paused. This was a question he had not expected. He thought carefully. No, I think my mind will still become disturbed sometimes. I will still experience sadness. I will still feel fear. I will still face difficulties. The monk smiled. Good, because the person who believes they will never suffer, has not yet understood life. The monk picked up a small stone from the ground. Look at this stone. The merchant looked. If I throw this stone into the river, what happens? Ripples appear. Yes. Can I prevent the river from moving? No. The monk nodded. But can the river remain a river even when waves appear? Yes. Your mind is the same. Peace does not mean there are no waves. Peace means you remember that you are deeper than the waves. The merchant stood quietly. He remembered his first night at the monastery. The silence had frightened him, because when the outside world became quiet, he finally heard the noise inside himself. But now, silence had become his teacher. He no longer feared being alone with his thoughts, because he understood. A thought was only a visitor, an emotion was only a visitor, a difficult moment was only a visitor. None of them were permanent. Before leaving, the merchant asked one final question. Master, how can I protect this understanding when I return to my old life? The monk smiled. You cannot protect peace by hiding it, you must practice it. The merchant listened carefully. When you return to your business, do not become lost in success. When people praise you, do not become dependent on their approval. When people criticize you, do not allow their words to steal your balance. When you gain something, be grateful. When you lose something, be wise.